Hey friends, it's Gloria and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing something different. I usually wrap up all of my books at the end of the month, but I honestly have just been reading too much and feel like talking about some of the books that I've read because I have 16 books to talk about that I read from May 1st to May 15th, which is a lot. So hence the video. In all honesty, I threw my entire May TBR out the window and I haven't completed a single book from it. I've started a few, but I have been completely mood reading. I've just been picking up whatever book feels right to me at that time, whatever is just calling to me. And I also have just been trying not to give myself any kind of pressure to read whatever, because again, it's fun. We get to read whatever we want to read. So here we are, and I'm going to do a mid-month wrap up, and to just totally change things around, I'm going to go from least enjoyable experience to most enjoyable reading experience. So let's get into the books. I'm going to start with my least favorite read so far this month, and that is The House on Foster Hill by Jamie Jo Wright. I'm sorry, Chantel. I know she's one of your favorite authors, and I know quite a few people love this author. This is a Christian fiction, romantic suspense mystery. I really did not like this one at all. I found this to be so cheesy and just cringy at certain parts. The historical timeline set in the early 1900s was pointless to me. It really didn't feel historical by any means. If it wasn't for the date, it could have been set in like 2015. There was nothing historical about it. Not the dialogue, not the atmosphere or the characters. The only thing that tried to tie into it being a historical setting was when the author was describing the girl like running, she'd always be like, I'm holding on to my skirts. That was like the only indication that it was historical. Overall, the premise is about a house. There's a historical time period where a woman has some interaction with this house and it kind of feels ghostly. And then in the present timeline, there's a woman that moves into this house that also a bunch of creepy stuff starts happening. It just honestly just wasn't the book for me, but it did help me realize something. And I think I read historical fiction to immerse myself in a historical period or a historical event. But this was rather a mystery book that used the historical setting just for a plot point to get people that like to read historical. I didn't actually find this to give me any kind of understanding about a historical time period. So sorry, Chantel, I didn't love your favorite author. Next up are my 3-star reads, which are still positive. I still liked them, got something out of them, but I just had some problems and they weren't my favorite, and sometimes maybe a little bit of slog to get through. The first one is A Man Called Uwe by Frederick Bachman. Please do not come at me, but I am not a Frederick Bachman fan. I just don't think that he is the author for me. This is the second book of his that I've read. The first one was Britt Marie Was Here, and I just don't think I like a grumpy man story that hates his life and has just had a lot of unfortunate circumstances and is just grumpy at the world and hates everyone. I just don't think I like that kind of character. I can't relate to them. I honestly don't really have sympathy for them. So that's definitely just a me thing. I think I was a little bit surprised at how much focus there was on suicide in this book, but it also was still like sweet and redemptive, and I totally understand why people love it, but I just personally didn't really connect with it like some others do. The next 3-star read for me was The Last Garden in England by Julia Kelly, another historical fiction. And this one was really close to being a really great book. There were some great characters here. There was like historical relevance to it that I enjoyed. But what really brought this book down, it was a little bit all over the place. There were 7 perspectives and 3 time periods in a very short, slim book. So I feel like if the author could have scaled that back, taken off some of the characters that didn't really matter or have significance to the plot, it would have been better, because there were some characters that were really great and I just wish that they had more time to shine. But overall, this story is centered around Highbury House and its gardens. And 3 main timelines are 1907, when a woman horticulturalist is designing this garden; 1944, what is happening to the house and the gardens amidst war, particularly the house being a convalescent home and the different people that are involved in living during that time period; and then present day, a woman horticulturist redesigning the garden back to its original historical design. So there's a little bit of like uncovering history to understand what happened. It was good, but it was just a little bit too much all over the place. My next 3-star read, which I was very surprised that I picked up, but I think I owe it to Shelley Swearingen because she talked about maybe reading this book if she had the opportunity, and that is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I never thought that I would read this book because I do not read contemporary romance, but here we are. I had it as an option to listen to from Libro FM, so thanks Libro FM for giving me the chance to listen to it, and I honestly was just really curious about what all of this is about because so many people read contemporary romance, and I'm like, I need to know what it's all about. Why are people reading these books? What's so great about them? I understand the hype. I understand why people read these kinds of books. They are incredibly compulsive. Could not stop listening to this book. However, I have a bunch of mixed feelings about it. The banter was great. I think there's very witty dialogue. It is very unrealistic because I'm like, no one talks like that. No one is that clever and like on that level of making everything into a joke at all times. There's a lot of unrealisticness in this whole story, but I also understand why people go towards these kinds of books, to read that, to escape and kind of have fun and just sit there with the dialogue and the sexual tension that the author is creating. So with my reading experience, I liked it, but I didn't love the characters all that much. And you're a 32-year-old woman and you are still sad that your sister wants to not live in the same town as you. Okay. Also, you have mommy issues that are 20 years old that you haven't dealt with. And it just seemed very silly at times and unrealistic that a person of that age would be dealing with those kinds of things. So yeah, this book is like 90% flirtation and sexual buildup, and then like 10% anything else relevant to the plot. So the question I ask myself is, will I be reading more of these? Well, to answer that and to spoil my part 2 May wrap up, yes. Yes, I picked up another Emily Henry, and I'll have more thoughts on that in my next wrap up, but I don't think that I'm fully converted to reading contemporary romance. I don't know, I still have mixed feelings about it. Overall, from the reviews that I see coming in though, for people who do read these genres often, everyone is loving this book, and I'm definitely in the minority with being like on the 3-star end of it. My next 3-star read is a classic, and that is Emma by Jane Austen. So I read Pride and Prejudice in April to talk to you guys about it, that I loved my experience. I still had a Audible trial, and so I had an opportunity to listen to another Jane Austen, and I chose Emma because I own this book, it's on my shelf, and I also enjoyed this one. It wasn't bad, but in comparison to Pride and Prejudice, I was extremely bored. Like, nothing really happened in this book. It was a lot more just like mundane and boring. And even though this is technically a romance, the romance was very lacking for me. In comparison to Pride and Prejudice, there's a lot more kind of anticipation and build-up and conversations between the characters. And with Emma and Mr. Knightley, they were friends, really like brother and sister first, and then in the end, just out of nowhere, they fall in love. And I don't get it, because there wasn't any moments where there was any of that relationship built up. It just kind of was like, oh yeah, I guess I love you. What? Didn't see that coming. And also, like I mentioned a lot, I really need to care about my characters, and I really didn't like Emma. I didn't relate to her. I found her to be obnoxious and snobby and kind of stupid, and I was like, you need to get over yourself. I also didn't really like any of the other side characters and wasn't rooting for them, connecting with them, and that's why this one just really didn't work for me. Don't worry, it didn't really put me off of Jane Austen. I'm like still in the mood to read all of her other books. I know a lot of you recommended Persuasion, and I know the adaptation is coming out, so I think that's going to be the next one that I pick up. Let's move on to the 4-star reads. I picked up Lightfall, Book 2, Shadow of the Bird by Tim Probert. I read Lightfall, The Girl in the Caldarian, the first book in this middle grade fantasy graphic novel series, in February, and I really enjoyed it. I just found it so sweet and so fun, and this is the second book that just released in April. A lot less enjoyable for me. The kind of like the magicalness of it wore off. I found it to be a lot more like choppy, kind of like random characters thrown in, not enough furthering of the plot line to like think this was incredible, but it was still really cute and the illustration was fun, and I think a kid would still really love this. Also, thanks to Shelley, I picked up some more picture books. If you haven't watched, I really got into picture books in April for a picture book readathon, and I had some lingering holds at my library that I picked up at the beginning of this month in May. The first one is Unspeakable. This is a nonfiction picture book about the Tulsa Race Massacre, which is an event in Oklahoma history that not a lot of people have talked about or know about. I first heard of this event from the book Dreamland Burning. It is a young adult historical fiction that talks about the Tulsa Massacre. This one was a great one just for a general understanding of what happened. I don't know enough about kids to know what age this would be appropriate enough to like educate a child on what happened, but it was still really good and very informative and a shocking moment of American history that people don't know about. I also picked up Watercress by Andrea Wang. I guess this is the only book that I read that kind of works with the Asian readathon kind of happening this month. This is all about a young girl that doesn't really want to dive into her family, heritage, and culture. Her parents make her pick some watercress and talk about their childhood, and she's at first kind of like, ugh, I don't want to be a part of this, but then she has better understanding of what her mother went through and what her family went through. So yeah, I enjoyed this one. I don't know if it's like a full standout, but I appreciated kind of this little like moment of this child realizing something about where she came from. Another picture book that I've read in May is Bear Came Along. This book has some adorable and colorful illustrations. It was very sweet, very fun, definitely one that I would read with the kids someday. The story was very simple, but this is a very cute book that I think young kids would really enjoy. I then picked up a Khaled Hosseini Sea Prayer, and this is technically not a picture book, although it could be because it's full of pictures and very little words. This is a lot more artistic and poetry like. The art style is very like watercolory, kind of messy, and I just appreciated sitting in the moment of what this refugee experience was like. Khaled Hosseini wrote this book to memorialize and think about all of the refugees that fled persecution and then drowned in the waters leaving Syria. I thought it was beautiful and impactful, something I would read again. Another 4-star historical fiction for me is When the World Was Ours by Liz Kessler. This is a upper middle grade historical fiction, and this book is all about 3 best friends, 2 boys and a girl. 2 are Jewish and 1 is German. They all grew up together, but then the war breaks out and one girl and her family is sent to a concentration camp. One boy is able to flee and is able to be saved from the war, and then the German boy ends up becoming a Nazi officer. And I would recommend this book for fans of The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. I think this author did a good job of writing out what a young child would be thinking about and processing amidst all of the chaos of war and losing your friends out of nowhere and life circumstances changing. This is a very heartbreaking book. It just kind of will just rip your heart out in the end. It is a bit intense, but I thought was really well done. The next book I read is Bibliophile by Jane Mount. This is a non-fiction book for book lovers. This book is full of wonderful illustrations and also facts about genres of books and popular books. The author highlights bookstores around the world, libraries around the world, where prolific authors wrote their works and what kind of spaces they wrote them in. She mentions the top and popular books in each genre, as well as the ones that were popular in certain time periods. It was very fun to read, and I would definitely recommend for people who love books to just kind of flip through, look at, peruse. We are getting there. This next book is Still Alice by Lisa Genova. This was an author that I've been meaning to get to, and I'm finally glad I did. Listen to the audiobook, which was great, narrated by the author herself, and this book was very fascinating, and I really want to watch the movie after reading this just to visualize how the story unfolded. It's all about a woman who just turned 50. She's a very intelligent linguistics professor working at Harvard in Boston. Around her 50th birthday, she starts forgetting things, so she gets diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. This is all about how Alzheimer's just ravages the human mind and body and the breakdown of her life, and it particularly highlights her relationship with her husband and her children. And overall, this was fascinating, really, really well done. It was just so sad. It was depressing. It was very hard. I can't imagine someone experiencing this or going through this. So this was a very heavy book, but so well written at the same time. A nonfiction that I picked up this month is Cultish by Amanda Montell. This one I was going back and forth between 4 and 5 stars, and I think I landed on 4 stars. This one was so fascinating to me. It was really interesting to dive into, and it made me think a lot. I also related to this book a lot without going into too many details. I basically grew up in a religious cult without realizing it was a cult. It was supposedly just your average Pentecostal church, but in all reality, especially now, being away from that church and my parents having left it too, it is 100% a cult. And I think what this author does is she highlights certain characteristics of what makes a cult, but then she also kind of talks about all of the different parts of our life and culture that could be considered cults without us realizing it. For example, she talks about multi-level marketing schemes like essential oil companies. She highlights Scientology. She highlights very specific cults as well. But then she also makes a point that anything can become a cult. Peloton and CrossFit can also become cults. And it actually made me think about Booktube, because Booktube can technically be a cult if we take her definition of it, which is a group of people kind of creating their own language and excluding others. Although I think Booktube is very inclusive, so I wouldn't consider it a cult, but it did make me think about what kind of things can be cults or not. I thought it was really well done and very fascinating, and would highly recommend. The audiobook was also excellent. I'm going to end with 2 picture books that I gave 5 stars. Again, thank you, Shelley, for talking about these and making me want to read them. The first one is Hello Lighthouse by Sophie Blackall. This one just had stunning illustrations, but didn't lack in the story. It talked about a specific person and his family who lived in the lighthouse and how the lighthouse changed over the years. But what really took this book over the top for me is the author's note. It really put the whole book into perspective for me, and I saw this book in a new lens of understanding it from a historical perspective of what lighthouses were intended for, how people used to live in them, what their lives were like, and then how they changed over the years. And then the best book that I've read so far this month is also a picture book, and that is Mel Fell by Corey R. Tabor. This is easily the cutest book I have ever read, and it's also very fun and uniquely made because it requires the reader to like turn the book over and that kind of thing within the story. It's also read this way instead of this way. This was just like the perfect sweet little picture book. Fun illustrations, adorable storyline, uniquely created, wonderful. So those are all the books that I've read between May 1st and May 15th, and I'm still on a roll. I'm still loving reading. I really hope to pick up some books that I talked about in my May TBR because I still want to read those, but I'm not going to pressure myself. I'm just reading whatever I'm in the mood for right now, and it's been a lot of fun. Not every single book was a standout book, but I feel like I learned something about myself even from the books that weren't incredible. Let me know how your reading is going so far in May. Are you reading amazing ones? Are you kind of feeling like you're in a reading slump and you're not really picking anything up? Let me know how it's going and if you have any thoughts about any of these books as well. And I will see you guys in another video soon. Bye!